Hi guys, in this video on biomes and the biosphere, I'm going to look at a couple of population theories. And the two that you need to learn for the exam are by Malthus and by Boserup. Okay, so Malthus, some of you might have done this in English when you studied Christmas Carol, and it's a kind of very similar, it's the same theory. So what Malthus is saying is that population will always outgrow the amount of food that we make, and we'll always have issues. We will always have deaths in a population, whether that's a human population or an animal population, because of the way that food and animals and human beings grow. So what he's saying is that population increases what we call geometrically. So that's 2, 4, 8, 16, 32. So that gets bigger very, very quickly. Unfortunately, what he is telling us is that food increases what we call arithmetically, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you will always have a situation where the amount of food that you have will be outstripped by the amount of population that we have. So we've got a population in the world of 7 billion almost. It's rising maybe to 9 billion in 2030. So from Malthus's point of view, he's saying that we're always going to have an issue. So he says that there needs to be two types of check to stop the population growing. And we can see this in the animal kingdom, but we almost don't see it as human beings because we kind of think we're above nature in some ways. And he says that there's either things called positive checks, so things like war, famine, pandemics, which curb the population and stop the population growing, or what we call preventative checks. And that could be things like marrying later, having less children, the China one-child policy, etc., to actually decrease the population. So that is Malthus's theory on population versus resources. So that's the first one. The second one to counter-argue with Malthus is Boserup. And Boserup came along in the 1950s or 60s. And she said that basically that technology would save the day, that it didn't really matter how big the population got, that we would always find a way out of the problems that we have. And to a certain extent, we can see that this may well be the case, possibly. So machinery can be invented to increase food population, so combine harvesters and lots of different things there that we use on farms around the world to increase harvests. That can be one way through the use of technology, and a good example here is the use of GM crops. So genetically modified seeds will grow in wet conditions, they'll grow in very dry conditions, they'll grow in hot and cold conditions. We can have wheat, for example, that's got added vitamins in, etc., etc. So GM crops is a big one that Boserup would suggest would help overcome the problem of resources not being enough for the population. Irrigation schemes, that's another one to help water plants in drier areas. Fertilizers, pesticides, anything that's to do with technology. So all of these will overcome our issues of food production, that's what she was saying, and allow populations to be fed. Okay, we could argue that the COVID vaccine is a good example of this. Boserup would say that disease is a way to check the population, which we've seen, because worldwide we've seen over 1 million deaths now with COVID. However, we have got a vaccine which is being rolled out. So we could argue that both of these are valid, that we do have things that act as natural population checks. However, we can argue that Boserup, as Boserup said, that we can have something else happening. So was Boserup right, or was Malthus right? That's what you maybe get an exam question on. You could be asked about either, or you could be asked to evaluate both of their theories. So what we could say here with Malthus is that he does have a point, that these things do happen. However, we have got something like the pandemic that's come along and caused a lot of problems and deaths. However, Boserup is also, we can see Boserup is also correct, because we do have a vaccine for COVID at the moment. So we can weigh up and say that both are pretty valid, but you may want to come down maybe on the side of Boserup, because I think maybe evidence would show that maybe this is more valid. And then the only thing that could stop this is some kind of crisis, which we've seen with the pandemic. So it could be global warming could happen, but we do have technology, obviously, like green energy, etc., electric cars. So we could argue again that we do have something trying to check the population, but technology has come along to try and limit that. So they are the two theories about population versus resources.